Welcome to Question of Strength number 81. That's a good start. This is the podcast where I essentially tell you about a little something that I either learned this week, something I find important or noticed. Anyway, something I want to share with you guys to help you understand training, nutrition, supplementation a bit better. Then I get to the important and fun part of this podcast, which is answering your questions. And that actually puts the pressure on you guys because how interesting this podcast gets is entirely dependent on the live questions I get in the chat section of this YouTube presentation. If I don't have good questions, you won't get good answers. Now, granted, if you have poor questions, it might lead to a sarcastic answer, which is almost as fun as a good answer. All right. So, but just make sure that you do post as many questions as possible. The last few weeks have been amazing in terms of the questions I'm getting. Were both challenging but also interesting because they were pretty much covering all topics of strength training. So I thank you for your questions, and hopefully you're going to be as good this week as the other guys were earlier in the earlier presentations. All right, one thing I want to talk about is actually something I experienced, or experiencing over the past few weeks with my training and nutrition. And it's gonna go somewhere. Don't worry. Okay, I'm gonna talk about myself for a few seconds, which I don't like doing, but it will just help drive the point home. Now I'm approaching what I would call a degree of leanness that is extremely close to my last photo shoot. I would estimate that in probably 2 more weeks I will be there. Okay, I'm the leanest I've been in probably a year and a half. But two observations. First, I'm doing that without much food restriction. I'm eating less than what I'm trying to gain as much size as possible, but I'm certainly not restricting my food choices. Last photo shoot, what I did was essentially use an extremely low carbs diet. Uh, Only having carbs in form of surge workout fuel I want to work out. Everything else was just protein and some fats. I did lose a lot of fat and did get into pretty good condition, but also felt like I lost some muscle. And more importantly, I felt like complete doo doo during the whole process. Well, the first 2 weeks were fine because of the adrenaline rush, but afterwards it was extremely hard. And even in the past, even like earlier, the photo shoot was 2 years ago. So last year, I got into really good shape using a more balanced diet. Well, I started out with the carnivore diet for 7 weeks, then used a bit more carbohydrates, but it was still a very restrictive diet. And there too, I actually stopped because I was starting feeling like crap, which is bad because it's nice and fun to get lean. But if you don't enjoy your life when you're in that state, well, what good is it for? And furthermore, how can you maintain that degree of leanness if you feel like crap the whole time, right? It's not sustainable. Now, this time, and I'm actually right now, that's a cool. I'm not actively trying to get into photo shoot shape. What I'm doing is simply having a lot more performance based training, a lot more physical activity in my week than I did when I was preparing for the photo shoot and my cut. So, for example, my week will typically look like two strength based sessions in which I use a Hepburn model. If you want to learn more about the Hepburn progression, you can easily find some articles on the internet. I think I might have written some of them in the past myself. So it's for strength twice a week. I'm training essentially 4 lifts for strength, 2 per day. So for example, day one could be um, snatch grip high pulls from blocks and dips. And then the other two, the next workout would be Zercher squats and bench press, for example. Okay, so I have two of these workouts per week. And I also have two conditioning based lifting workouts, which are essentially CrossFit without the dumb exercises. So it's a workout I do at the gym with my wife. So we, for example, last session, which was yesterday, was dips for maximum reps, so body weight just as many as possible. Then for me, it was snatch with high pull for sets of five. Then walk for 60 meters, then biking for 2 minutes, and then the bike was the active rest period. Then we start over again. I also had abs in there. My wife did a slightly different circuit. She did the dips, but she did deadlift instead of high pull, and she was crazy enough to add rowing ergometer at the end of the circuit. I did 6 rounds, she did five. So we do two of these more conditioning based circuit training workouts per week. I also have martial art classes 3 times a week. That's not 3 sessions, not 3 days, because I have one day I have two classes back to back, one by myself and one private, my son. And we also have boxing once a week. So it's a pretty full schedule on top of my, I wouldn't say daily cardio, but I do get in at least, let's say, 12,000 steps per day. Like this morning, I had 5,000 before 9 a.m. Okay, just by going to the grocery store on foot. I also do some uh, cardio on my treadmill about 3 times a week. So that's a boatload of physical activity. And I also try to move as much as possible, walking the dog and stuff like that. And I'm not restricting my food as much. I'm making good choices, but my carbs are in there. If I want to eat ice cream, like yesterday I had ice cream, I'm going to eat ice cream. And I'm feeling amazing. Like literally, I don't feel like I should feel when I'm this lean. So what is interesting here is that it will allow me, but I think, to be able to maintain that degree of leanness or even leaner without feeling bad. And that led me to the topic I want to cover today, is that all caloric deficits are not equal. Now, we will agree that to lose fat, for most people, caloric deficit is the most important portion, okay? The most important element, the most important factor. If you're not in a deficit, it's kind of hard to lose fat. Now, people misunderstand what a deficit is. A deficit doesn't mean eating less, although that can be part of it or a strategy to achieve that deficit. A deficit is the difference between your caloric intake, the food you're eating, and your energy outtake. So, how much energy you're burning every day from your basal metabolic rate, your physical activity, the background physical activity, just how much you're moving throughout the day, your training, thermic effect of food, and stuff like that. Okay, so you can create the deficit by reducing food a lot while maintaining the same level of background or overall physical activity, or you can try to increase activity level to create that deficit. If food doesn't change or doesn't change much, let's say that your food is here, your activity level is here, and you are maintaining your body weight. So that's probably maintenance. So you can either reduce food, uh, reduce food to create the deficit, or you could increase activity to create the same deficit, or you can do a combination of both, right? What I find is that the thing that leads to all the negative drawbacks of a fat loss phase, being hungry all the time, food cravings, mood swing, low energy, poor sleep, drop in libido, it's all related to the decrease in food intake. Okay, so the more you can keep food in, the more food you can keep in while still being in a deficit, the better you'll feel. That's what I'm noticing. And that's what I noticed when I was working with bodybuilders. For example, I was helping this bodybuilder for to win a show, and he, as a light heavyweight, or well, a small heavyweight, like it was 200, um, he was able to diet keeping close to 4,000 calories all the way to his show, because he was doing his cardio every day and he was also working a physical labor job. So that allows him to keep a lot of food in. And he felt great during the whole prep. Like I was shredded and he didn't feel like someone that lean should feel. Okay, so certainly not how I feel when I used to get that lean. So that's one thing that people need to consider, is that yes, a deficit is important, but how you establish that deficit probably matters more for long-term success. There were a few studies done on that topic. For example, they looked at establishing a deficit through uh, calorie to food reduction or activity increase. And what they found was that the group that decreased food reported tremendously higher hunger. Not surprising, right? But you might think that maybe like the higher activity level gets you more hungry. So no, it really what gets you hungry, what gives you those craving is the fact that you're not giving your body enough food. You're reducing food quantities compared to what you normally eat. And people who were on a deficit with activity did not feel the same hunger problem. There were also some longer term studies showing that weight loss maintenance is much easier and successful when more of the deficit was established through activity rather than food reduction or dramatic diets. Okay, And if you look at other population, like there was a cool study done on the Amish population. You know what the Amish are? They basically live like we're still in the 1700s. So that means a lot of physical activity, lots of background physical activity. They reported an average of 20,000 steps for the men and 12,000 for the women per day, okay, on top of just physical labor. And what they found was that despite consuming a very high calories diet, consuming lots of fat and lots of simple sugar, the rate of obesity is almost non-existent, and the level of leanness in the population was very low, much lower than the traditional population. Again, not everybody can afford the time to do that much amount of activity, but certainly just changing your mindset in not just trying to eat less, but try to increase your activity level first to see what happens, and only use food when it's absolutely needed. Because that's a strategy that will lead to the most metabolic adaptation, hunger, cravings, and will make your efforts less sustainable. All right. That having been said, already lots of questions in the chat room, so don't hesitate to put more in. So let's get to your questions. First one by Nick. Good morning, sir. Good morning to you too. In terms of upper body pulling performance exercise selection, that's a long sentence. Is the pendler row a better choice than the chin up? Nervous system activation. Can you ramp pendler row? Something like that. Well, both actually work slightly different way. One is, of course, a vertical pull. One is an horizontal pull. So right away, that makes a difference. The pendlay row will tend to bias a bit more the upper back. So that could be the rhomboids, that could be the rear delts, that could be the mid traps, the lower traps, and there's obviously some form of lats involvement, especially if you row closer to your hip. You roll toward your hip rather than trying to roll to your stomach. But it's still mostly an upper back dominant move. There's also, because it's an horizontal pull, there's lot, there's less biceps involvement than the vertical pulling. Vertical pulling, biceps is more active and more significantly involved than in horizontal pulls, especially since the pendlay row isn't well performed with that supinated grip, which would probably involve the bicep more. It's safer with a pronated grip. Now, the chin up, of course, the limitation is the starting weight. For many people, it's equivalent to something like 80%. Like if you can get, let's say, 8 quality body weight chin up, which is better than most. Okay, you can get 8 quality chin up. Then just the first set, you're starting at essentially what is 75% of your maximum, because at 75%, you should be able to do 8 reps. Some people can do 8 reps to 80%. But what I mean is that your body weight alone, which you can't decrease when doing chin up, it's like starting on a bench with 80% on the bar at your first set. So as you mentioned, yeah, that it's harder to ramp up, but also it can be a shock to start with. So you can actually try to circumvent that by using the machine that gives you a counterweight, although it doesn't prepare you 100% for the chin up weight because you don't have to control your body in space. And that's important. The chin up performance is heavily influenced is the tension you can keep in your body. A lot of people just keep their body way too relaxed on chin ups, which actually makes the chin up harder. Anyway, just get back to the topic. The chin up, in my opinion, would be more if you can, as a good exercise, would be a good exercise if you are someone who can easily get, let's say, at least 15 good chin ups. Now, if you can get 15 good body weight chin up, no cheating, chin over the bar and stuff like that, then you can probably treat it as a strength or performance movement. Okay, but the pendlay row, because of how hard it is for most people to get to 15 clean chin ups, will remain the choice for most. Again, it doesn't work exactly the same muscles, but when I design a program for athletes, uh, especially if I'm using my Omni contraction training system, the pendlay row is normally the pulling movement I'm using. All right. What are your thoughts on this? Length plus a resistant movement arm is a good way to select exercise for hypertrophy. For example, preacher curl is better than incline curl. Uh, Standing good morning is better than Romanian deadlift. Again, that's because the lever, the weight being high, further away from your hips, would make the movement harder. Uh, there's probably some truth to it, although personally, I would not agree with the standing good morning over RDL, just from experience. Uh, Doing it myself and also using it with other people, because the longer lever arm actually puts more strain on the lower back rather than the hamstring. That's what I noticed. And the breaking point of the standing good morning is a lot more often the lower back and even upper back. You're just rounding up rather than the hamstrings and glutes. Whereas the RDL, it's much easier to maintain that position. The main reason is that it's easier to engage your lats in the RDL, and because you can keep the bar closer to your hips. Again, yes, in that case, the longer lever arm make the standing good morning harder, more demanding, but it's mostly on the erector spinae. Whereas the RDL would be better for the hamstrings and glutes, depending on, well, stiff leg would be better for hamstrings and RDL for glutes. But in your general sense, I would agree that for hypertrophy, you can play with the resistance movement arm. The longer lever will make the muscle have to produce more tension to overcome the resistance. However, you can simply circumvent that by on exercises where you have a more advantageous movement arm and you can just add more weight. So I think the more important portion is the part of the range of motion or the percentage of the range of motion in which there's a significant amount of tension being produced. For example, you take a dumbbell lateral raise or a dumbbell fly, maybe less than half of the range of motion is actually under significant tension. If you look at a cable fly, then it's close to 100% of the range of motion that is under significant tension. Same thing with cable lateral raises or machine lateral raises. So to me, it's more a matter of making more of the range of motion under tension rather than increasing peak tension at a specific point. All right. Greg, I don't see that you have answered my question, so I'm going to try to invent or deduce what you're asking. Your question is, hi, coach. Hi. When you're training athletes with a skill split, and that was my question. What do you mean by skill split? I know that in the past, I mentioned using either a contraction type split with athletes. So, for example, when they would be eccentric focus, when they would be statodynamic focus, when they would be concentric focus, or I use a motor skill or a movement or a capacity. In which case, I would use those strength on day one. On Wednesday, it would be speed strength, and then on Friday, it would be strength, speed, or resistance, depending on the goal. So if you mean the later, no, I would not use the omnicontraction system within that framework. The omnicontraction system would be used in itself, and if that's the tool I need. So an athlete that I start working with who likely has deficient eccentric and isometric strength relative to his concentric strength, because most traditional sports performance training program neglect the eccentric and especially isometric portion in favor of the concentric strength. So a lot of athletes are deficient in eccentric and isometric strength compared to the concentric. So I need to start with the oblique contraction to bring that up to par. In fact, I want eccentric strength to be much higher to give a strength reserve and also to prevent injuries. But once they do have sufficient eccentric strength, then I will switch to a more sport specific approach, which uses still whole body training, but I'm going to be training the physical capacities involved in the sport. If I'm playing football, I do need strength, I do need uh, speed strength, I need strength speed. Some level of resistance, but that would be done with conditioning work and not so much with the strength work. So no, I would not like do the strength day. It would not be centric, concentric, isometric. It would be just strength work. On some phases, I might, for example, do the strength work with a slower eccentric or with an isometric pause in some weeks, depending on the weakness or strength of the individual. But I would not specifically train all different type of contractions in that split. But most people with whom I use that motor skill split have gone through months of omnicontraction training system prior to that. So it doesn't take much just to maintain those capacities. That's a good question. That's a valid question. All right. What's the most difficult injury you had to battle, and how did you get through it? I didn't get through it. Actually, I only had like one serious injury in my training career, and that's pretty exceptional because I've done some stupid crap in my life. I mean, I remember doing a 100 bench press set in a workout. Uh, on top of it. And that was one of the most insane things I've done. Anyway, I've I had some minor pec injuries. Like I had minor pec tears twice while bench pressing 425, but I was able to recover from that 100%. I did tear my left bicep. That was when I was competing weightlifting, doing a high pull. I pulled too early with my arms, so that just gave a shock to my bicep, and I tore the long head of the bicep, which was completely torn, and I did never got it fixed. And it's probably too late for that because it's been like 25 years. Uh, but it's not that debilitating. Yeah, my left arm is much smaller than right arm, but strength wise, it's almost the same. So it's not a big deal for me. I mean, I have a tattoo on that arm now, so it doesn't look as small as the other one. The contrast isn't as marked. And so the only injury I really had that is in my training, even to this day, was a shoulder injury that actually came from a elbow injury. That elbow injury is unfixable because it's a calcium deposit in my elbow or something like that. I don't exactly know why, but my right arm cannot fully extend, and that uh, developed when I was focusing mostly on gymnastic rings. And again, me being me, I was excessive in my application of the method. I would do like 2 hours at a body weight of 225. So I just did way too much work. And that created some damage, which led to me not being capable of fully extending my elbow. And I still can't fully extend it. And when I was bench pressing, what it did was I compensated by when I was pressing from the bar, because I couldn't fully extend at the end, I would raise my shoulder to even it out with the left side, and that led to shoulder injuries. And even to this day, it's on and off. I mean, sometimes it's decent. Sometimes it gets bad. If I put a lot of time on a bench press, it just flares out. Like when I was doing the Boris Shako training program, I lasted like 4 weeks, and then my shoulder was killing me, even though the weights were not that heavy. Okay, and that has impacted my pressing strength significantly, probably because of neurological inhibition. Okay, so basically my body is protecting itself against itself, so it prevents full activation of those pressing muscles. Ironically, from hypertrophy standpoint, it didn't make that much of a difference. It's just a matter of functional muscle. Look, the one time I was able to get my bench press up high again was when I actually used electrostimulation on my interior deltoid, and that allowed me to lift heavy weights. Just to me exemplified that the issue is neurological. I just not as efficient at recruiting my front delts as I was prior to the injury. So I'm still functional. I can do pretty much everything, just that I lack pressing strength. I tried pretty much everything: deep tissue massage therapy, active release, any treatment, and even posturology, anything you can think of. And because it comes from the elbow, even if the pain in the shoulder goes away, it just comes back. So yeah, I couldn't fix it. I mean, when I use BPC 157 and TB 500, it gets a lot better, and I can do, for example, dips with heavy weights 3 times a week. I can do snatches. I can even do like machine presses with heavy weights, just not the barbell bench press for some reason. Uh, can you gain muscle or maintain muscle with minimum effective volume? It's called minimum effective volume for a reason. Emphasis on effective, meaning that if it's effective, it works. Okay, it's the minimum amount of work that volume that still works at stimulating muscle growth. Again, and minimal effective volume needs to be put into context. For example, if you take your sets to failure, so you go to failure on your sets, you will have not only more effective reps in that set compared to if you stop 2 reps short of failure, but because the closer the reps are to failure, the more effective they are to stimulate muscle growth. So, for example, the rep just before hitting failure is going to be more effective than 3 reps away from failure, even though they are all effective reps. Okay, so if you stop, for example, 2 reps short of failure, that set is likely going to be half as effective as going to failure. So if you're talking strictly about volume, well, if you push your sets to failure, you actually don't need a lot of volume to stimulate growth. You even need less to maintain muscle growth. I know that personally, when I do an effort-based training program, by the way, I do sell an effort-based training program on tnation.com on the stores, also with a volume-based and an effort-based program. When I do an effort-based program, which is lower volume and taking the sets to failure, I find that I can keep gaining muscle by doing roughly 4 to 6 sets per week per muscle. Uh, and to me, that is equivalent to roughly 10 to 12 sets not taken to failure. Now, if you're talking about sets not taken to failure, then the number of sets you're performing actually matters more when it comes to building muscle. Typically speaking, when it comes to like non-failure training, we can maintain muscle with about 1/4 or 25% of your normal volume. So, for example, if you normally do, let's say, so that I can easily calculate, let's say that you do let's say 10 sets per week per muscle. That's low, but that's just going to make it easy for me to calculate. Let's say 20 sets per muscle per week. Okay, 1/4 of that would be 5 sets. So you can maintain your muscle mass with 5 sets done at the same level of effort as your 20 sets were. Okay, of course, if you push your sets harder, like closer to failure, you might actually gain muscle. Uh, Now you can start gaining muscle around 1/3 of the volume you are using. Okay, but it's going to be very slow. So yeah, you can build muscle or at least maintain it by using minimum hypertrophy volume. Absolutely. Recommendations on deload, between deload and tapering before the event. Very good question. I actually have a chapter on that in my new book, the Overload System, that is available through Human Kinetics. Basically, I explain the three different types of deloads in my opinion. Okay, so the first type is a preventive deload or a corrective deload. So basically, you are doing an easier week of training, for example, or even taking a week off to either prevent fatigue or to cure short-term fatigue accumulation. So, for example, let's say that you did not plan your training cycle properly. And that can happen not because you don't know about training. I've misplanned my own training many times, not because I don't know training, it's because sometimes I underestimate the impact of external stress factors on my recovery capacity. Okay. So that it's entirely possible that you plan your training program, it looks great on paper, but because of the things that life throws at you during that week or that program, you just build up more fatigue and you find yourself down the drain. Now, rather than just hitting your head against the wall and trying to power through it, you will take a deload to get rid of the excessive fatigue and replan your training cycle according to your new fatigue level. Okay, so that would be one way of doing it. The other way is uh, include a preventive week every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the person. Okay, that you do not when you have already accumulated too much fatigue, but just so that you do not accumulate excessive fatigue. Okay, and that is to be honest, more in performance sports where the nervous system needs to get its peak performance almost all the time. So a decrease in, let's say, 10%, 15% in neurological capacity can lead to very poor performance on the field or in the technical practices or in the strength training. Same would apply for powerlifters where they need to be at their peak level of strength as much as possible. For bodybuilding purposes, for hypertrophy purposes, it's not as needed at those preventive deloads because you're not going to be draining yourself as much and you're not reliant on maximum performance as much. If you're training for hypertrophy, as long as you go very close to failure, your set will work. So even if you are forced to use a little bit less weight this week because you're fatigued, you can still make gains as far as hypertrophy. But since strength gains are really much dependent on the load being used, if you train yourself into the ground and you are forced to use less weight, then it's going to absolutely impact your long-term performance. And the same thing with speed and power that athletes need to train. So for those people, performance-based people, strength-based people, I can see the logic for including a deload week somewhere in the training cycle, oftentimes between two training blocks. So you have a training block, and that block is aimed at triggering certain adaptations. And once the block is over, you can take 1 week of transition before the next block to first recover from the fatigue accumulated in the first block and to make sure that you are in the optimal condition to start your new block. Okay. However, I think that most people abuse that. Most people simply don't train hard enough or with demanding methods that are demanding enough to justify the frequency of deload weeks that is sometimes recommended. I would say that very few people actually need to deload every 4 weeks. Every 6 weeks, I can see that. Okay, I like, for example, in the training program I have developed for T Nation. Again, it's in the online store. You go on online store category plans. You're gonna find it there. It's the hypertrophy program. It's based on three phases: one volume based, one effort based, one load based. And my recommendation is to take these programs are 6 weeks long. It's take 1 week of deload between each program, just to make sure that you are in the best possible physical state and neurological state to start the next phase. Okay, so but 6 weeks would be, in my opinion, the lowest amount of frequency I would use a preventive deload with. Okay, and the truth is that most people that you see in gyms simply don't train hard enough to justify a deload. Okay, now the second type of deload is what I call a resensitization period. So it's a period where you add a few weeks. It could be 1 to 3 or even 4 weeks of either no training or no lifting. You can do physical activity, you can do conditioning, you can do mobility, but no lifting. Or let's say two, 1 week off, or 2 weeks, even 4 weeks of dramatically lowered training volume, like 25%. Okay, and then you would use that time to do conditioning, mobility, power training, stuff you didn't do during a training cycle. Now, that is done at the end of a long training cycle. Long training cycle being anywhere between 12, maybe to 16 weeks. Sometimes some people can like push it as long as 20, but typically it's 16. Why? Or 12? The reason is that a properly designed training cycle should have the training stress gradually increase from honestly week to week, certainly throughout the whole training cycle. So you start at a level that is manageable, and the goal is to work toward a level of stress that is close to the limit that you can tolerate. The reason why you do that is that every time you repeat the same level of stress, it's slightly less effective because the way training works is you're imposing a training stress on the body, and your body adapts to that stress, essentially becoming better at facing the stress. That's what makes you stronger, that makes you bigger, etc. Okay. So if you are slightly stronger or better adapted when the new stimulus come, if it's the same stimulus, it is obviously going to have a much lower impact on your need to adapt because you're already partially adapted. Okay. So if you want your training to continue being as effective as it was at first, you need to gradually make it harder, not necessarily every week, but certainly every roughly 3 weeks or something like that. So at the end of 12 weeks, you're pretty much at a level that is the maximum tolerable training stress you can handle. So now you're facing with a situation that that level of stress is very close to driving me into the ground. But after a few sessions of this, it's becoming less and less and less effective, and I can no longer increase the training stress. Otherwise, I'll run myself into the ground. So my options are keep banging myself against the wall for minimal gains, or take a week where I resensitize my body. That's called strategic deconditioning by dramatically reducing volume, the minimum amount of volume necessary to maintain muscle. Okay. And then so that you resensitize your body, the longer you can sustain that without becoming mental because you're not training hard, the better it is. So when you start a new training cycle, you don't have to start at the super high point because you spent a few weeks at a very low volume or even not training. So when you start, you can start your training cycle only slightly higher in the beginning of your previous one. And you're going to work yourself back up instead of keeping yourself high and just driving yourself to the ground. That would be a second type of deload, which is more of a resensitization strategy. The last one would be, as you mentioned, a peaking or tapering for an event. And again, that will be completely event dependent. The way it works, deloading in that specific case is mostly about, okay, especially if we're talking about strength, power, speed sports, okay, which are is more my area of expertise. Uh, the main thing will help you overperform in competition compared to training. So turning in your best performance on competition day will be a response to adrenaline because a competition spikes adrenaline. The more responsive you are to that adrenaline, the more you gain from it during your competition. What happens is throughout the training cycle, especially if you're preparing for an event. So you have the mental stress of the event coming up. You also have maybe other stressors, but you're suddenly ramping up your training leading up to the contest, which means that nearing the end of your preparation, you are in your most tired fatigue state. And the main thing that will cause that fatigue is a downregulation of your beta adrenergic receptors, essentially because of the stress of the upcoming competition, as well as the ramped up training, you produce a lot more cortisol, you produce more adrenaline. Because cortisol increases the level of adrenaline by increasing the conversion of noradrenaline into adrenaline. And the more adrenaline you produce, the more likely you are to downregulate your receptors. So what happens is if your receptors respond less to adrenaline, come competition day, you don't benefit as much from the spike in adrenaline. So the goal of the taper period really is to reestablish the sensitivity of the beta adrenergic receptors by lowering cortisol and adrenaline as much as possible. And that can be done by lowering any variable that has an impact on cortisol. And the three main ones, and there are other ones, of course, the three main ones would be volume, load, or psychological stress created by the load, and intensiveness or the level of effort to close that failure. So these would be the three main ways of deloading. You can also increase rest intervals because it does play a role in increasing adrenaline, uh, and keep use simpler exercises, which would not be the case for picking for a competition because you're probably testing those lifts. You want to keep practicing them. So basically, you are lowering dramatically volume. If you're competing in strength sport, you need to dramatically reduce volume because you cannot decrease load that much because you don't want to lose the feeling of heavyweight. Okay, certainly you don't want to max out too close to your competition because that can burn out. I recommend the last heavy, like very heavy session would be between 7 to 10 days before the event, where you would probably go up if it's a strength sport to your openers or something like that. Then the other sessions would range between 70% to 85% with sets of roughly 3 repetitions for a low number of sets. You don't do any assistance work, it's only the main lift. The goal is do as little work as possible so that you get the least amount of cortisol produced, less adrenaline, meaning you can resensitize your adrenergic receptors. But you still want to keep practicing your competition if you're competing in a strength sport. If you're competing in a sport, you can actually almost drop lifting and just practice your sport for a week. But that's the goal. The goal is just to remove as much cortisol and adrenaline as possible so that you can resensitize your receptors. Strategies like increasing carbohydrates intake would help. Increase using glycine post workout in the evening will help. Taking magnesium post workout in the evening will help. Anything that can lower adrenaline and lower cortisol would be very helpful in that regard. Okay. So these would be the three main types of deloading strategies. By the way, in just again to pimp my stuff again in my book, The Overall Training System, it's also on Amazon. There's a table explaining the factors that play an impact on how frequently you need to deload if you go with the preventive deload strategy. Good question. Sorry, I just moved fast. Okay, okay, you asking about the video clip of you with that coaches intro is that lean. That wasn't my leanness actually. I'm probably the same level of leanness right now, uh, but yeah, roughly that. Okay, I coach. Apologies in advance for the lack of precision in my question. Thank you. Could you give some tips on how a jiu-jitsu athlete should train in the gym to increase strength and power? I've actually addressed that in previous questions. Uh, I'm going to just explain my general belief when it comes to strength training. And again, strength training is not the same as hypertrophy training, not the same as power training, not the same as transfer training. Okay, strength training is aimed specifically at increasing the athlete's muscle strength and, more importantly, neurological strength, the capacity of the nervous system to recruit the fast twitch fibers and to produce lots of force. Okay, and because of that, the movement selection or the strategies don't need to be as specific to the sport as what many people think. Yeah, doing an exercise that seems to copy an exercise that you're doing in your competition, in your sport, might seem enticing. In reality, that is not a great way to increase your strength. That would be a transfer strategy. Okay, transfer strategy is a phase of exercises that are dynamically similar or more similar to some of your sporting actions. And this is done, take the strength gains you made, or strength or power gains you made during most of the off season, and transfer them better to your sport. Okay, so that would be the pre-competitive period in traditional periodization lingo. I call it a transfer phase. And the way I structure a transfer phase is typically as complexes. Complexes are a combination of two to four, sometimes five, but I prefer to go with two or three normally, exercises for similar muscle groups and sometimes similar movement pattern, okay, but with different goal in mind. It could be different physical capacities, or in the case of transfer, it could be a strength movement followed by a transfer exercise. So, for example, you could do, uh, let's say, a deadlift and rest 2 or 3 minutes, then a Zercher squat. Zercher squat would be more specific for grappling, even more so if it's done with a heavy bag. You have, let's say, a very heavy striking bag, you can do it, grab it by the bottom part, and you do Zercher squat with that. That's super, super specific. That would be an example. If I'm training a sprinter, it could be, for example, doing a back squat with a sprint start, for example. Okay, that could be a transfer strategy. But for the most of the off season, I'm going to use more of a general approach to strength building. When it comes to power and conditioning, I would be more sport specific. I would, for grapplers, the one thing I do like, for example, is the Zercher squat. I love the Zercher squat for, as far as squat type. That's the one I go with for grapplers because it involves a lot more upper body. It involves a lot more core, and it's very similar in structure to what you do. The best form of Zercher squat for a grappler would be doing Zercher squat with a strongman log. Okay, not a super thick one, but like a small one from Rome, for example, or a thick bar, uh, because you want to load that properly. I also love any form of Olympic lifting from the hang. In fact, grapplers are probably the only one I would actually go with a full squat clean from the hang, because the capacity to go from extension to explosion to dipping under is specific to sports like judo, grappling, jiu-jitsu, and stuff like that. But certainly, Olympic lift from the hang will be in the general preparation. These are not necessarily specific movement, but they are still a bit closer as far as movement pattern go than more traditional exercise. I think that Romanian deadlift is a good movement, but I would again go with the Zercher good morning. That would be my 8 inch movement, because the more you can involve that, the better you'll do at grappling. And you also want to work on grip strength as much as possible. The good thing with the Zercher, again, because you are involving all of that while training the lower body, and you are also strengthening the core a lot more because it's front loaded. The core works a lot harder, which is very much involved in jiu-jitsu, judo, and all grappling sports. Why are people moody or hangry when they are in a caloric deficit? Less neurotransmitter being produced. Why do I act like a zombie after a hard, intensive workout? Uh, okay, that's two questions. First question, in a deficit. Um, I can see, okay, the main reason why you're moody or angry, yes, neurotransmitter plays a big role. That's the main driver. Now, let's look at what happens when you are in a severe caloric deficit. First, especially if the deficit is significant and low in carbs, your adrenaline will be higher. That's why a lot of people go on a keto diet or intermittent fasting, and they actually report higher energy levels at first. So, dude, I'm not eating any carbs and I'm full of fuel, I'm full of energy. No, you're not. It's artificial energy because low blood sugar forces you to release cortisol because cortisol will mobilize stored blood muscle glycogen to send it to the blood to increase blood sugar level to normal levels. And cortisol, when it's released, will increase adrenaline. And that increase in adrenaline will make you more aggressive, more impatient, for example, more touchy. So that's the main reason behind the aggressiveness, the lack of patience, and intolerant mood when you are. It's the cortisol leading to high adrenaline. It's the same reason why, after a while, it gets a lot harder to sleep when you're in a caloric deficit because adrenaline stays high throughout the evening, and when you go to bed, it's still high, meaning your neurons are firing on all cylinders. It's very hard to put yourself to rest. Okay. Now, moody things though. Moody could also be a decrease in dopamine and serotonin. It's pretty much well documented that a lower carbohydrate intake lead to a decrease in serotonin level. And serotonin is the neurotransmitter that allows you to be adaptable, to be able to fit in as many different situations as possible. People with low serotonin will tend to have dramatic shifts in humor. It can go from depressive to overly excited pretty easily. So that could be it now. As far as your workout, you mentioned that uh, why do I act like a zombie after an intensive workout? Yeah. Yeah, that could be many things. That's a sign typically of high central fatigue. And that will happen mostly when the workout add a lot of afferent signals sent from the muscle and other tissue to the brain, afferent signal of discomfort, of pain, and of level of effort. So yeah, a more demanding workout, a more painful workout would lead to that state because you become neurologically inhibited. That's a protective mechanism by your body. It to prevent you for doing more harm to your body. If that makes sense. You just put a ton of stress on the body, and all those signals told your brain something bad is happening. I'm in a fight or something, and then as soon as it can relax, it will inhibit your nervous system to reduce the likelihood of yourself putting that strain again before you recover. Okay, that's central fatigue. I personally get that when I do my metabolic conditioning sessions or boxing session. I mentioned earlier that I'm doing two strength workouts a week, two metabolic conditioning workouts a week, martial arts 3 days a week or three times a week, boxing once a week. So me, what is uncomfortable for me, what sends signal of distress to my brain is hard energy systems work. When I'm out of breath, when I feel like I'm about to drown, when my muscles are on fire, that sends a lot of signal, a lot more than heavy training, which I'm used to. Okay? So the more used to you are to a type of work, the less of that effect it will have. But yes, that's central fatigue. Should you eat if you're not feeling good? That depends on why you're not feeling good. Uh, Mood or behavior or whatnot, the way you feel can be many different things. Like poor gut health could make you feel like crap. In that case, eating might not be the best solution. It can be low serotonin, it could be low dopamine, it could be just the fact that you are in a high adrenaline level. It could be many things. A lot of people do have the natural instinct of craving sugar or eating sugar or carbohydrates when they are depressed, when they are anxious, when they are stressed out. The reason is that carbohydrates are sedative. Carbohydrates will decrease cortisol, will decrease adrenaline, it calms you down. So when you are coming back home and you had a fight with your wife, for example, you're stressed out, then you might, or your boyfriend left you, or your girlfriend left you, you're depressed, then oftentimes you will seek for a reassurance or good feelings from food. Either using carbohydrates as a way to numb yourself by calming your brain down, if you're anxious, for example, or using pleasure food to spike dopamine dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter. So if you're depressed, increasing dopamine might make you feel a bit better. So um, the only time where I think that eating when you're not feeling good can be a good thing is if feeling bad is due to hypoglycemia, but that often happens to me. For example, if I skip a meal and I just train and I wait too long before I eat some carbs, I will get uh, I become kind of an asshole. Like the Snickers ad, or is it the Snickers or is it the Snickers? Well, you nut yourself when you're hungry. That's kind of that's okay, and that's low blood sugar. So if that's the cause, then yeah, eating would help. It can also help if you are overly stressed out in the evening or anxious. But then again, don't make sure not to fall into okay. I need to eat cake to feel better. Just regular carbohydrates will do the trick. But it's not always the solution. Coach, I don't have much experience in training. Can I still sign up for the new online course you have launched? I'd like to take your money, but I would wait until you have more learning experience and lifting experience behind your belt because I do cover physiology pretty extensively, and you do need a pretty strong basic foundation in understanding training from that course. But thank you for your input. The US FDA classified peptides as a class 2. What are alternatives to faster healing if peptides are not available? I don't think they will not be available because you can still, as for example, in Canada it's the same situation, but they're still available as research chemicals. The only difference now is that compounding pharmacies won't be able to prescribe it without a prescription. But several peptide companies, have already came out to say that because they sell them as research chemical right now, it's kind of a in between zone, so they can probably still sell it. As far as once they become unavailable for real, I'm not aware of anything remotely close to BP 157 and TP4 or 500 as recovery and repair. It's weird because for once we have a product that has like very few, if not any side effect, and that just can help so many people. I mean, yeah, that's a theory. Okay? If you follow American football, Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles tendon at the first game, and now we're 7 weeks into it, and he's already like throwing the football, and he's talking about returning this season. Typically, an Achilles is 6 to 8 months of recovery, but he's already walking and jogging and throwing a football. That's pretty impressive. My guess, especially considering that he's very much into alternative medicine, is that he probably goes BPC 157 and PB4 pretty heavily. And honestly, it should be part of most professional athletes' arsenal because I mean, if you're making like 10 millions a year if you play, well, better make sure you can play. Could eating carbohydrates at night affect our circadian rhythm? Uh, Not really. In fact, it can help because what affects circadian rhythm is mostly cortisol and melatonin. Okay, and both are antagonistic, meaning that cortisol prevents the release of melatonin and vice versa. That's why, for example, Dr. Rakowski, when people who have chronic high cortisol levels, what he recommends is taking 1 milligram of melatonin every hour just to prevent that spike in cortisol. But just to get back to your question, meaning that when cortisol is very high, it prevents the release of melatonin, which starts the rest the rest and recovery cycle or the parasympathetic part of your circadian rhythm. So carbohydrates are sedative, so they will lower cortisol, which could help you increase melatonin. Now, the reason why some people you're asking the question is probably on the effect of insulin release on growth hormone. But studies have demonstrated that eating carbohydrates, even before bed, does not blunt the growth hormone release. So I would not worry about that. I would say that like eating like a very, very, very large meal might have a negative impact because now the body puts a lot of strain on the digestive system, so it's harder to fully recover, fully relax. But just a normal amount of carbs. I actually recommend all the athletes I'm working with to allocate their carbs after the workout at the evening as for the two priority places. What would be a basic 2 times lower body a week outline for someone battling chronic adductor injury? Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. I'm not someone who loves to answer injury-related questions, even though it's not asking about rehabbing the injury. Um, I will still answer your question because uh, I have that injury. I mean, I pulled an adductor when I was shuffling snow and slid on the ice, and it's come back here and again. Not all the time, but sometimes it's bothering me. And if your goal, you're asking, is squats really worth it? Now, if your goal is only hypertrophy, no, it's not. I'm not saying it's not a good exercise, but if your goal is only building muscle, not being strong in the lift or developing neurological efficiency, then you have plenty of exercises that are just as good, if not better, than the squats to be for hypertrophy, like a hack squat machine. A very close grip, like feet together hack squat, should not stress the adductors, for example. Certainly, stopping at like around parallel would decrease the strain on the adductors because they are more involved in the bottom portion. Um, you can get like lots of quad gain with leg extension, with leg curl, Romanian deadlift. So yeah, I mean, when I have my adductor issues, I can do pretty much anything except deep squat. And again, if I want to squat, for example, if I strict program, I can still do like 90-degree squat. It's absolutely squat, okay? But if your goal is hypertrophy, you actually don't need the back squat itself. Okay, coach. Mac10 versus magnesium. What do you Mac10? Do you mean Mac10 like the supplement Mac10 by Biotest or magnesium bin glycine post workout? Which one is better? I don't understand it. Do you mean like magnesium biglycinate, or you mean I don't understand your question? How can I be strong, lift heavy weights? I mean that's kind of a weird question. How can I be strong? Strength training is the way to get strong. Now there are many ways of training to get stronger. Again, I don't. That question kind of tells me that you are kind of a beginner at this. Correct. So I don't think I can get too deep into my answer. I certainly cannot give you a program, but what I could recommend if you're starting out with strength work, I mean, if you've been doing mostly bodybuilding work or hypertrophy work or not training at all, I would look to either Starting Strength by Mike Ripito or the original 531 by Jim Wendler. And this would be my starting place for someone who wants to get into strength training. The reason is that they are not overly stressful, meaning that they don't use maximum weight, and it's very, 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 very progressive. Okay, so I would look into these two programs because I just cannot, like, with a visual or oral answer, describe how to train for strength, especially if you have no experience at all training for strength. Yeah, you meant magnesium. Okay, like magnesium theanine, theanate, and biglycinate. I personally go with the biglycinate. However, it depends on if you are using glycine or not. If you're using glycine post workout, go with magnesium theanate or depending, or you could actually go with taurate. My best choice, okay, my honest to God choice, post workout. First choice would be because I'm using glycine with athletes and myself. You use glycine post workout, then magnesium biglycinate is kind of redundant because magnesium biglycinate is magnesium plus two molecules of glycine. You already have glycine in the form of glycine, so no need to add more. You're already covered there. So might as well go with magnesium taurate. Taurate will be probably the best one post workout because it will not shut you down too much. Taurine is more of a neurological balancer. It makes or an equalizer. It makes sure that all your neurotransmitters are working in balance. If you're too hyped up, it will calm you down. If you're too low, it will bring you up. So that's what I would go with along with the glycine to avoid shutting yourself down too much. If you're talking about in the evening, then I would go with magnesium threonate. Threonate is the best one to induce relaxation. All right. And the question, will TRT increase my energy level? Of course. When I was in my middle 20s, I used to do a lot. I would work full time, help out my parents, then lift weights. Oh, I don't do that anymore. Well, uh, there's obviously an aging component, again, depending on how old you are, but it might also be a responsibility issue. If you have a family, if you have a time job, if you have a financial stress, that's different. There's also some wear and tear on your body. Well, certainly, hormones can play a role. If you are diagnosed with low testosterone, that will absolutely lead to lower energy level, low drive, low competitiveness, worse mood, more prone to depression. And bringing that up to normal testosterone level will absolutely make you feel better and more energetic. The key thing is be sure to get your levels checked. Don't assume you have low testosterone just because you have low energy. How do fitness people at 60 look younger? Like Christy Berkeley. I don't know who Christy Berkeley is. Does workout produce IGF-1 naturally? Uh, well, first, leanness. Okay, what I notice personally is that when I'm leaner, I look younger. And I'm 47, and I essentially look exactly the same facially as I did when I was 18, or maybe not 18, but let's say like 22, 24. It's funny because I'm preparing a seminar with my friend Ali Gilbert. It's going to be a pretty cool one if you're in the Orlando area around February. It's going to be on the differences between training natural, training on TRT, training on steroids. And it's going to be really, really deep in that topic. Anyway, so Ali and I were talking and said, well, we're going to do an abs contest when we're there. And for some reason, it went when I was fatter, when I was younger. So I said, go to Google and look for Thibaudeau before pictures. So you have a picture of me like before and after. That's actually from one of my first teenage articles. The first one, the before picture, is when I was like somewhat fat with hair. I'm actually looking older than I'm looking right now. And the after picture, which is shirtless and in shape, and that was taken literally 25 years ago. I have the exact same face now. Maybe bigger ears now because ears and nose keep growing even as you're getting older, but my skin looks the same. So again, when I grew my beard, it's white, so I look older, but facially I'm the same. Now, uh, why would fitness people be in better shape? Just because you are maintaining the efficiency of your system, because you're releasing more cytokines, which help with tissue repair. So, activity. One book I recommend, if you can find it, I read it like years ago. It's called Younger Next Year, and it explains the physiological effect of exercise on the body's repair and anti-aging process. So, yeah, I believe that fitter individuals will tend to age more gracefully, even from an aesthetic or visual or skin standpoint. However, we should also not forget about the use of growth hormone and TRT, which will play a huge role in anti-aging, especially growth hormone, especially in women. Obviously, people will normally not publicize their use, but it is rampant. So that is always a factor to consider. All right, guys. So we're up for the hour. Hopefully, you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed my experience today. I really love your questions. New people here, so that's always fun to see. Hopefully, you guys will come back next week and bring some friends because the more questions we have, the more fun it is. So, again, next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Testosterone Nation YouTube channel. See you there.